General Hospital will reveal. Here is the extended and detailed version of your passage in English. Under the dim, flickering lights of Windermere, Sidwell stood motionless, his fingers gliding over the razor-sharp edge of the dagger he held in his grasp. The cold steel reflected the faint glow of the chandeliers above, illuminating the intricate patterns etched into the blade. This was no ordinary relic, it was an invaluable artifact, a piece of history that bore the weight of generations, a remnant of the Cassadine family's dark and illustrious past. The craftsmanship of the dagger alone spoke of its age and significance, a weapon forged in the shadows of a dynasty built on power, deceit, and blood. Yet, what captivated Sidwell most was not merely the origins of the blade, but the story behind how it had come into his possession. He had not unearthed it by accident, nor had he stumbled upon it in the forgotten depths of Windermere. No, this was something far more deliberate, something deeply personal. A shadowy figure, one whose identity remained concealed in whispers and obscurity, had placed it into his hands, their voice carrying the weight of a revelation that would change his life forever. "This belongs to you," the stranger had said, their tone thick with certainty and meaning. And with those few words, everything Sidwell had ever known about himself had begun to unravel. For years, he had been an outlier, a man without a true place, always lurking on the edges of power but never fully belonging. But this dagger, this single object, was proof of a truth long buried, a secret that had been kept from him for reasons he had yet to uncover. He was not a nameless drifter in the grand scheme of Port Charles. He was not an outsider. He was blood. He was Cassadine. The revelation sent a shiver through him, not of fear, but of exhilaration. He could feel it, as if something dormant inside him had been awakened by the very touch of the blade. The lineage, the legacy, the weight of history, it all surged through his veins. His entire existence had been a lie, carefully orchestrated to keep him in the dark, to keep him away from the power that was rightfully his. But now, fate had intervened. As he studied the dagger, his grip tightening around its handle, Sidwell knew that this was only the beginning. Whoever had given him this weapon had done so for a reason. They had revealed a sliver of the truth, just enough to set him on a path he could no longer turn away from. The Cassadines had denied him his birthright, but he would take it back, piece by piece, secret by secret, drop of blood by drop of blood. And in that moment, as the wind howled outside the walls of Windermere, Sidwell smiled to himself, the cold realization settling deep within his soul. This dagger was more than just a relic. It was a symbol of everything he had lost, and everything he was about to reclaim. With this dagger in his possession, Sidwell not only had the opportunity to claim his rightful lineage but also to exact revenge. The weight of history pressed against his palm, and he relished the power it bestowed upon him. His first target was clear, Alexis. She, more than anyone, represented the Cassadine legacy that had ignored, abandoned, and erased him. She was the perfect pawn in his game, a symbol of both the bloodline he had been denied and the suffering he intended to inflict. When Sidwell invited Alexis to Windermere, he did so with calculated precision, ensuring every detail of the moment would serve his purpose. As she stepped inside the dimly lit estate, a sense of foreboding settled over her, but she pushed it aside, unaware of the darkness lurking in the corners of that night. Her eyes met his with suspicion, but he remained composed, his expression unreadable, except for the hint of satisfaction gleaming beneath the surface. And then, he presented the dagger. The moment Alexis laid eyes on it, her breath hitched. She hesitated before reaching for it, her fingers trembling ever so slightly as they traced the intricate engravings on the hilt. The weight of the weapon felt unsettling in her grip, as though it carried with it the ghosts of the past. Her mind raced back to a time of betrayal, violence, and blood spilled in the name of power. The Cassadines had built their empire on suffering, and this dagger was a relic of that harrowing truth. Sidwell watched her intently, every flicker of emotion on her face fueling his quiet amusement. He had anticipated this reaction. He wanted her to feel the weight of history, the stain of the Cassadine name, the torment of what had been lost and what could never be undone. But this was only the beginning. What lay ahead would be far worse than mere memories. Alexis had unknowingly played right into his hands, and she had no idea that with just one touch of the blade, she was sealing her fate. The horror that awaited her had already been set in motion, and Sidwell was prepared to ensure she suffered every agonizing second of it. Sidwell knew that Alexis would not be easily manipulated. She was intelligent, experienced, and had spent a lifetime navigating the treacherous waters of both the legal world and the dark, tangled history of the Cassidines. She had built walls around herself, fortified by years of distrust and survival, making it nearly impossible to catch her off guard. But even the strongest walls had cracks, and Sidwell was patient. He understood that all it would take was a single moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment, a fleeting instant where emotions clouded her reason. And when that moment came, she would fall right into the intricate trap he had spent so long crafting. As Alexis reached for the dagger, hesitation flickered across her face, but it was already too late. The moment her fingers made contact with the weapon's cool surface, the weight of history seemed to press down upon her. The silver hilt, ornately carved with Cassidine symbols, felt foreign yet familiar in her grasp. The air in the room seemed to still, as though the past itself was watching, waiting. Unbeknownst to her, that single touch sealed her fate. The delicate yet precise engravings on the hilt served more than an ornamental purpose. They were designed to capture the smallest details of a grip, to preserve an imprint long after the weapon had left its holder's hand. Sidwell had ensured that the polished silver would record exactly what he needed, Alexis's fingerprints, clear and undeniable, etched onto the murder weapon before the crime had even been committed. Now, there was only one piece missing, the victim. Sidwell had already chosen her. Kristina. The name echoed in his mind, laced with the venom of long-brewing resentment. Kristina was not just Alexis's daughter, she was also Sunny's, a direct link to the man Sidwell despised, a reminder of the bloodline that had flourished while his own existence had been buried in secrecy. But more than that, Kristina was intertwined with someone else, someone Sidwell had an even deeper claim over. Blaze. His daughter. The child he had fathered with Natalia, raised in another man's world, shaped by a life that had no trace of him in it. And yet, Kristina had taken what was his. Sidwell had watched as his daughter's affection grew toward Kristina, their bond strengthening with every passing day. He had witnessed the love between them, a love that should have been his to nurture, his to protect. Instead, it belonged to a woman who carried the Corinthos name, a name that represented everything that had been denied to him. Kristina was not just an obstacle, she was a symbol of everything Sidwell loathed. And now, with Alexis unknowingly implicated, all that remained was the final act of his plan. Kristina's life would end by the very blade Alexis had touched, and when the blood was spilled, there would be no doubt as to who had wielded the weapon. It would be Alexis's fingerprints found on the dagger, Alexis's past that would be dissected and condemned, Alexis's life that would unravel in the wake of her daughter's murder. Sidwell had engineered a perfect crime, one that would strike at the heart of both the Cassidines and the Corinthos family in a single, devastating blow. And as he envisioned the moment when the plan would come to fruition, a slow, chilling smile crept across his face. The pieces were in place. Now, all he had to do was set the final stage. He had been watching her for days, carefully tracking her every movement, studying her habits with meticulous precision. Every morning jog, every stop at Charlie's pub, every moment she spent with Blaze, it was all burned into his mind, forming an intricate map of her life. Not a single detail escaped him. He wasn't driven by personal hatred toward Kristina herself, she was merely a pawn, a means to an end. The true target of his vengeance was Sunny. Sidwell understood the power of striking where it hurt the most. Sunny was a man forged in violence, a survivor of wars fought in the shadows of Port Charles. But for all his strength, for all his influence, Sunny had a fatal flaw, his love for his family. He could withstand attacks on his empire, betrayal from his allies, even brushes with death, but harm one of his children, and the man unraveled. That was the Achilles heel Sidwell intended to exploit. But there was more to his plan than just hurting Sunny. Kristina wasn't just the daughter of his enemy, she was entangled in something even more personal, something that fueled his rage with every passing moment. Blaze, Kristina's lover, was his own flesh and blood. His daughter. The child he had fathered with Natalia, only to have her grow up without ever knowing the truth of her lineage. The very idea sickened him. Sidwell had spent his life clawing his way out of the darkness, carving a place for himself in a world that had sought to erase him. And yet, while he had been kept in the shadows, Sonny had built a dynasty, surrounding himself with children who adored him, a family that would kill and die for him. It was an injustice that Sidwell could not stomach. Every time he saw Kristina with Blaze, laughing, holding hands, lost in the warmth of love and devotion, something inside him twisted with fury. That should have been his connection to cherish, his daughter's loyalty to claim. Blaze was his, and yet she had given herself to a Corinthos. It was intolerable. Sidwell seethed at the thought of Sonny's easy, undeserved happiness. How could a man like him, a criminal, a man who had taken so much from others, be rewarded with the very thing Sidwell had been denied? He had been cast aside, left to forge his own path in exile, while Sonny continued to bask in the love of a family that should never have been his. No, this was more than revenge. This was justice. By taking Kristina, Sidwell would accomplish more than just punishing Sonny. He would take back what should have been his all along. With one calculated move, he would dismantle the illusion of Sonny's perfect world, rip apart the ties that bound his daughter to the Corinthos name, and remind everyone that the blood of a Cassadine could not be erased so easily. And when the deed was done, when Sonny's world came crashing down and Alexis stood accused of the crime, Sidwell would watch as the chaos unfolded with the satisfaction of a man who had finally reclaimed what had always been rightfully his. When the fateful night arrived, Sidwell did not hesitate. Every moment of planning, every carefully calculated step, had led to this. There was no room for error. The dagger in his grip was as steady as his resolve, its blade gleaming in the dim light just before he drove it forward. Straight into Kristina's chest. She never had a chance to scream. The sharp steel pierced through her flesh effortlessly, silencing her before fear could fully register in her eyes. A single gasp of air escaped her lips, her body jerking in stunned agony before her legs gave out beneath her. She crumpled to the ground, her blood pooling in a deep crimson stain across the floor, soaking into the cracks of the cold surface beneath her. The air, thick with the scent of iron, remained eerily still. Sidwell stepped back, his heart pounding, not with remorse, but with satisfaction. It had been swift, clean, exactly as he had intended. Kristina Corinthos Davis was gone, and with her, the perfect life Sonny had built for himself had begun to crumble. And then, right on cue, Alexis entered. Her footsteps were hurried, unsteady, driven by a dreadful sense of foreboding that had gnawed at her the moment she arrived. But nothing could have prepared her for what she saw. The moment her gaze fell upon Kristina's lifeless form sprawled across the floor, her world shattered. No, the word barely left her lips, breathless and broken. Her entire body trembled as she rushed forward, collapsing onto her knees beside her daughter. Her hands hovered in hesitation before finally pressing against Kristina's blood-soaked chest, as if somehow, by sheer will alone, she could undo what had been done. Her fingers, once trembling, now smeared with the warmth of her daughter's fading life. Sidwell watched her reaction with an eerie calmness, his lips curling into a cold, detached smile. He had orchestrated this moment to perfection, and Alexis had walked straight into his trap. She had no idea that the dagger now lying beside Kristina's lifeless body was tainted not just with blood but with the undeniable imprint of her own fingerprints. The very touch that had lingered on the weapon when Sidwell first presented it to her at Windmere had now become her undoing. The sound of approaching sirens pierced the silence. The police arrived swiftly, their footsteps heavy as they stormed into the scene, weapons drawn. But there was no need for force. Alexis was frozen in place, paralyzed by shock and grief. She didn't resist as rough hands yanked her away from her daughter, as the cold bite of handcuffs snapped around her wrists. For the first time in her life, Alexis Davis had no defense, no counterargument, no escape. The officers spoke, issuing formalities, but their words blurred into a distant hum in her ears. The only thing she could focus on was Kristina's still body, the emptiness in the eyes that would never open again. Sidwell remained standing in the shadows, his expression unreadable, his presence unnoticed by the chaos unfolding before him. He had won. Every piece of the puzzle had fallen into place exactly as he had intended. As Alexis was led away, her face contorted with horror, grief, and helplessness, Sidwell finally allowed himself a final moment of indulgence. This was justice. This was revenge. And this was only the beginning. Sidwell had succeeded. Not only had he taken Kristina's life, but he had also destroyed Alexis's entire existence in one fell swoop. The agony in her eyes as she was dragged away, the way her body sagged under the crushing weight of grief and helplessness, it was everything he had envisioned. But this was far from the end. The dagger, still glistening with blood, was more than just a weapon of murder. It was a key, a symbol of power, and a remnant of the Cassadine legacy that had been buried in secrecy for too long. It carried a history far older than Sidwell himself, a truth woven into the very fabric of a family that had shaped Port Charles in shadows and blood. He had only just begun to unlock its secrets. Sidwell's ambition burned brighter than ever. The world had denied him his rightful place for far too long, but now, with every move he made, he was reclaiming what should have always belonged to him. The Cassadine name, the wealth, the power, the fear it commanded, he would take it all. Kristina's death was merely the first step. Alexis would rot in a cell, drowning in guilt and despair, her reputation tarnished beyond redemption. Sunny, once untouchable, would spiral into rage and grief, reckless and vulnerable. And Blaze, his own daughter, would be left shattered, torn between the love she had lost and the father she never knew she had. Sidwell relished the thought of it all unfolding exactly as he had planned. He was no longer a forgotten shadow lurking on the outskirts of history. He was a force of reckoning, a storm that no one had seen coming. And he wouldn't stop until every last piece of the Cassadine puzzle was in his hands. Until they all knew the truth. Until he had taken everything.